as of today, I am exactly 7 days postpartum. If there's anything I've learned with having a lot of babies is that every time it's a little bit different. Every time there are different struggles depending on so many different things, just like delivery and then the baby, and every baby I've had has had different struggles, different things that are a little bit easier in all the things. So let's kind of rewind back to on June 9th, I had my 40-week appointment, even though I was only 39 and 6. So it was the day before my due date. I had an appointment. My normal midwife was out of town traveling, so I saw a different midwife for that appointment. I am not a huge fan of cervical checks, just because you can be dilated for weeks and it means absolutely nothing, or you can be barely dilated at all and go into labor, you know, within a couple hours or a couple days. So a good kind of testament to that, with my 4th baby, I walked around for over a week at almost 6 centimeters and never went into labor. I still had to be induced on, because I went to like 42 weeks and I was just dilated the whole time walking around, and baby just didn't want to come. So I was seeing this other midwife. I just wanted to do a cervical check because I had an induction set for that Friday, which was going to be a couple days after my due date, obviously. That being said, I wanted to kind of know what my body was doing. We have talked about in other videos kind of very briefly how I've had prodromal labor, which is just real labor contractions that lead to nowhere. It's kind of like false labor, and I was having really hard contractions for the last like week of my pregnancy. Very real, very hard, like every 5 minutes or so for a good 7 days. So I was very tired. They were waking me up at night. I was getting cranky because contractions can hurt, and then mentally I was just exhausted because they had been going on for so long. And I was talking to the midwife about how if I did go into labor on my own, I was really nervous that I wasn't going to be able to differentiate between the prodromal labor I've been experiencing and real labor, which is exactly what ends up happening. But at this appointment, she checks me and I find out I'm like barely 1 centimeter dilated, very tight, very thick, and baby is just like not engaged. So at this point I know I'm going overdue. I did opt to have her strip my membranes. And to be honest, I wasn't very hopeful with the membrane sweep because I had one with my 4th pregnancy where I was almost 6 centimeters dilated and I still did not go into labor. So I wasn't expecting much. Nothing, not cramping, no bleeding, nothing. Tuesday is more of the same. We spend that day in the kitchen together, kind of distracting myself on my due date. Wednesday and Thursday, I start losing some mucus plug, you know, things are happening. Thursday, the 12th of June, for whatever reason, my husband's alarms for work just did not go off. He ended up waking up like as he should have been clocking in and was just like, hey, do you want me to stay home today? At this point, I have an induction set for the next morning anyways, like I'll just stay home with you today and I can, you know, you can rest, you can take a nap if you need to, I can handle the kids, you know, I can tackle whatever you want to get done today. So that's what ends up happening. My husband stays home that day, and we went shopping, we went out for breakfast with the kids, we kind of went and just did all of the last minute things that we wanted to get done before we had the baby. Like Joe cut the grass, we went and got a couple groceries for the kids, and it was just kind of like one of those days. Hitting at about like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I start to get a little bit more crampy. But once again, because I've been having all of those contractions for so long and they were more than what a normal Braxton Hicks was, I really didn't think much of it and was really trying to just ignore my contractions at that point, just in general, because I've been having them for so long. At this point in the afternoon, we're kind of like out in the garden. We're just kind of tinkering around, kind of like wasting the day away essentially, which felt really nice to do, but still being somewhat productive, if that makes really any sense. I'm sure that you guys also have days like that. You're just tinkering, doing small things, just trying to keep moving was the big one for me, and just trying to keep busy so that I wasn't thinking about the induction for the next day. It hits about 5 o'clock because we were eating dinner and I start to get some bigger contractions, but like I said, because of all the prodromal labor, I wasn't convinced anything was happening. My husband kind of looked over at me as we're eating across the table and he's like, I think you're in labor. Like, I think you're in labor. This seems a little bit more real. And I think from the outside looking in, after watching me have 4 babies, he could probably tell by the look on my face, the way that I was like carrying myself, the way I was breathing, that like, yeah, this is real. These are a little bit different than what I had been experiencing. But for me personally, because I had been feeling all of the contractions, I was a little bit more hesitant to be like, yeah, we should maybe wrap some things up here. We should maybe call labor and delivery and head in. So I kind of went throughout 5 o'clock. We finished off dinner. I cleaned up dinner. Joe and myself tackled bedtime with the kids, and it hit about 7:30. And I went, you know what? I'm just gonna go lay down in the bed. I'm very tired. I just kind of want to go lay down and rest. Joe kind of finishes off bedtime with the older kids, and I do exactly that. I'm laying in bed, I'm breathing through contractions. At this point, I'm somewhat convinced that maybe something might happen because I'm laying on a towel on the bed just to like catch anything if anything were to break. And that's kind of what I was waiting for. I had gone into labor twice on my own, and both times it started with my water breaking. So I think that's also why I was so hesitant to think that this was real, because my water hadn't broken. I hadn't lost any fluid other than some mucus plug, and I was really waiting for that like big sign for me to be like, yes, this is labor, this is real, I need to go in. I was also a little hesitant to go in because I had an induction set for like 6 a.m. the next morning. So I was due to go into labor and delivery in a couple hours anyways, and I was gonna feel really silly if I went in there thinking I was in labor and I really wasn't. So I continue laying in bed for about an hour. It hits 8:30 and I think, you know what, these contractions are getting bigger, they're getting stronger, I need to breathe through them, I'm very uncomfortable. I'm gonna time my next 2 or 3 contractions. That way, when I call labor and delivery to get their opinion on if I should come in or not tonight, I can at least give them some bit of an idea on how far apart these contractions are. So I do that. I time my next couple contractions. They're coming about every 3 or 4 minutes or so. They're not quite lasting a minute. My contractions are always hard to time because sometimes I'll have a contraction that, you know, lasts a minute and it's really strong and it's really hard, and then I'll have, you know, a 3-minute break, and then I'll have a 30-second contraction, and then maybe I'll have a 2-minute break, and then I'll have a really hard contraction. So they're really hard to map for me. But at this point, it's pushing 9 o'clock, 9:30 maybe, and I finally end up calling labor and delivery and asking, and they're like, hey, if you're feeling all of these things, this is your 5th baby, and I have an hour drive to the hospital, you should just come in. Like, at this point, I'm not gonna get to labor and delivery probably until like 11 anyways. And even if you're not in labor, you know, we're not gonna send you home, we're not gonna kick you out. If you have an induction set for, you know, a couple hours from now, we'll just keep you, we'll monitor you, we'll let you rest, and then, you know, we'll kick off your induction in the morning. Nothing to be embarrassed about, nothing to be weirded out about, but if you think that things are questionable enough, then they probably are. And so around 9:30, I end up calling my sister, who takes about an hour to get to our house from where she lives. So she drives up here, she sits with my kids about 10:30. She comes in, and at this point I have moved from downstairs to upstairs. I'm in the living room on the floor, still kind of hovering around my towel just in case things break, because at this point my contractions are very hard. I'm very uncomfortable every time, you know, in between contractions I was walking around, I was taking out the trash, I was sweeping, you know, like just doing all of the things, and my husband was like, just sit down, like stop, just, you know, just sit down, rest. And I was so antsy I couldn't. So, you know, I was like, please just let me do this. It's distracting me, it's just like keeping my mind somewhere else away from the pain. So at this point he's resting on the couch, just kind of like gearing up for the long night ahead essentially. My sister gets here a little after 10:30. It is pouring rain at this point. My husband loads me into the vehicle, and the entire time we're driving down to the hospital, which is another hour drive, I'm praying that we are gonna make it, because at this point I 100% know I'm in labor, and I know I'm transitioning because I get the shakes every time I hit that transitional period where I'm getting really close to being fully dilated. My jaw is chattering, I'm shaking like crazy. Every contraction is so hard, and we're about 15 minutes out from the hospital, and I start to feel a lot of pressure and the urge to push with some contractions. Not everyone, but enough of them where I'm like, okay, this is crazy. Like my water still hasn't broken at this point, and I'm kind of wondering what's going on with that specifically, like why my water hasn't broken, and I'm feeling so much pressure to push. So I'm kind of just breathing through contractions and hanging on to my husband as he's driving, and just like hoping we get there in time. Get up into labor and delivery, and I have the biggest contraction as we are getting wheeled in. And essentially, from what my husband tells me, is all the nurses at the nurses station took one look at me, and everyone jumped up and ran in the room behind me. And I mean, obviously they knew exactly what was happening. They knew how quickly this baby was gonna come. And I was still not like allowing myself to believe that I was as far along as I was at this point. At this point it's like 11:40. They get us into my delivery room. I sit down on a ball. They hook me up to the monitor right away and start asking me all of the questions when it comes to baby and how I want baby to be handled after delivery and all the things. They're monitoring my contractions on the machines, and they're like, okay, I really think we need to get you into the bed and we need to check you, see where you are. Plan for labor and delivery ideally was to get into the laboring tubs, and that was going to be my pain relief, was to get into the tub. But they're like, you know, if you're too far along, you're not going to be able to get into the tub, which I had mentally prepared myself for kind of the entire ride into the hospital, because I knew that before we even got there I was too far along and they were never going to let me in that tub. So I knew that I was just gonna have to rock it out, and it was gonna be what it was gonna be, and I just had to mentally prepare myself for that and push through whatever it ended up being. At this point it's probably like 11:50, and they check me and realize I am fully dilated, I am ready to push, but the pressure I was feeling was the amniotic sac basically trying to come through my cervix, and baby was trying to birth herself still in the sac, which is why basically the only reason I did not have her in a vehicle was because I could not get the sac through my cervix to be born kind of like whole in the whole little balloon bubble. They explained to me that their midwife on call is in another delivery, and I can either choose to wait for her and continue to labor on my own and kind of wait for that sac to pop, and hopefully she'll be done that delivery and she can come over and deliver when I'm ready, or they can go get the OB who is available. She can come in and break my water and I can push right away. And at this point the pain was real, the contractions were hard, and I was ready to push. I was feeling all the urges to push, and I knew the second they broke my water I was gonna be good to go, and I just kind of wanted to be done at that point. So I told them to go ahead and go get the OB on call, and she got in the room really quick, broke my water right away, and it seemed like she got into the room really quick and broke my water pretty quickly. Joe said she broke my water exactly at midnight, and she asked kind of how I was feeling. She waited for one contraction. She just wanted to see me go through a contraction. And I told her that during that contraction, I wanted to do a little bit of a baby push, just very gentle and kind of light, just to see if when I pushed, my body responded to that, and if I felt the baby kind of descend, because at this point she was still sitting really high because she was just still in that sack. So I kind of was hoping that with breaking my water she would descend and I would be able to push her out. And that's exactly what happened. She broke my water at midnight. I went through that one contraction, and then I told her with the next contraction I was ready to just go for it. She's like, yep, absolutely, let's do it. You know, if you're ready, I'm ready. And with my next contraction, I basically did one really long, really crazy push, and she was born at 12:04. So we were in the hospital for like 25 minutes or so from the time we arrived to the time she was delivered, and it was very quick for me and for the baby. I was in shock 100%. I knew what was happening, obviously, but I was shaking still. I cried hysterically, which I have never done with any of my other labors. It was just this huge rush. I think because in that moment I realized how close I was to probably having her in a vehicle, and just kind of like everything was over, everything was done, and it was just a really big rush of emotion. But baby came out healthy and very good, other than being very waterlogged because they broke my water and it didn't really have time to drain or anything. So she came out in basically a water gush, and she just inhaled a ton of amniotic fluid. It was all in her ears, and it was a little rough for her. So they took her pretty much right away and helped her breathe and got a lot of the fluid out of her lungs, and then after that she was good to go, and we got to hold her and see her and all the things. So that was also kind of hard because I had never had that experience before where they had to take the baby right away. And you know, I didn't even really get to see her for the first like two and a half hours or so. She was still in the room with us, but she was off in a corner, so I didn't really get to see her or hold her or anything like that. And I think that's why I was so in shock, because you delivered I delivered her, and then normally having the baby on my chest kind of centers me, and it's like, okay, baby's here, baby's good, like I did that, that's awesome, and it kind of brings me back down to reality. But this time, because they had to take her right away, I think I was just kind of like left spiraling. But Joe did a really good job like helping calm me back down, and all of the things. It was pretty good. It was just a very different experience than anything else. That being said, I know I had a video go up about baby names and how we had this name that we really liked, and we were still kind of wishy-washy. I talked about how we change names all the time at the end. Well, guess what? We did change her name. Originally, her name was going to be Maven, but we ended up going with Juniper at the last minute. It took us a full almost 2 days to name her after we had her, because we just weren't sure where to go with it. But we are very happy with Juniper. We are all in love with it here. Family loves it. It feels great. Been calling her June a lot, baby June. So she's doing really well. We've had some struggles with breastfeeding, hence we are now pretty much exclusively pumping. Maybe once a day I can get her to latch, but she has not been the most efficient eater when it comes to strictly breastfeeding. So pumping and giving her the milk has been much better for her. More content that way. So that's what we've been doing the last like 2 or 3 days, is pretty much exclusively pumping, Maybe I can get her to latch once or twice a day, but other than that, it's been pretty good. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I know everyone's been waiting for this. Thank you guys so much for all of your well wishes and your prayers.